Hey, we're live. This is exciting. And even though there's only two of us now, there may be three of us in a little while. So that'll be exciting.
It will be exciting.
Yeah.
Who the third person might be, we don't know.
It's Bryan Martinez. We can just
Dang it,
say it.
not that
Yeah. Yeah. So this is week 4 of the Scare-a-Thon, the October 2020 Scare-a-Thons. Very exciting. I can't believe we've been doing this for, I guess that kind of makes it a month. October is one of those weird 5-week months. I don't know. But yeah, so we're doing this all month long to benefit Boxville, Chicago, which, Aaron, I kind of kicked it off last week. Why don't you tell the fine folks watching, or folk, welcome, what and who Boxville are and why we're supporting this year?
I love that we have folk.
Yes.
This is good. So just a real quick recap, and I very much have enjoyed your recaps in the past. I'm like, wow, he's so succinct. I will try to follow suit. Boxville is an initiative urban juncture here in Chicago, located on the not quite south side, but like the southern side. I would say it's around like 61st and the Green Line. And what they do is they provide, it's an outdoor shipping container mall. They're repurposing old shipping containers and using those so that vendors and residents have opportunities to purchase one-of-a-kind products. And, it addresses like a food, the kind of the food desert issue. So, and what they're raising funds for right now is that they're looking to winterize those containers so that Boxville can be open year round. Because right now it's kind of a fair weather service. They have been going, they've been pushing on through October, but as the Chicago winter closes in, they may have to shift gears. But that, I know they just put a whole bunch of like outlets and things like that in the boxes. So they're looking to keep it open year round. And that's where your funds are going this year. We actually just, we just topped the 2,000 mark. So we're pushing for 3 in the over the next week or so. If we could keep those funds coming in, see if we can get $3,000, that would be fantastic. And yeah, that's Boxville in a nutshell.
Great. And we've been doing this Scare-a-Thon, not the live version, certainly. This is a new kind of a twist. But you and I have been talking about Scare-a-Thon for a couple of years now, and you've been doing it for 10 years, where every October you watch as many horror movies as possible, and you collect pledges, donations from people and kind of tally them up at the end of the month. People can do it by movie or just kind of a blanket amount that they want to give. And if you want to give this year to Boxville, you can just go to boxville.org/donate. I love being the grand control guy.
What a showman you are.
Well, speaking of the show, let's get on with it because, well, first of all, you are Aaron Christensen of Horror 101 with Dr. AC, lest we forget to do our introductions, which I almost did if it weren't for this handy Post-it. And yeah, so we're talking tonight. We're going to reopen... Oh, who am I? I don't know. I am Ian Simmons of Kicking the Seat. You're watching the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. And tonight we are reopening Accademia Giallo, which is our monthly look at the Giallo genre, the subgenre of, I guess, sort of Italian horror, but it's more like Italian thrillers kind of. Bryan Martinez of the Giallo Room is typically our third person here, and he will hopefully be joining us in the next half hour. Those of you who were with us last week know that he was worried that he would have to cut his appearances on the Scare-a-Thon short because he had recently acquired a new job, but it looks like he may be able to make the schedule work for tonight at least to drop by and talk about our film at hand, A Lizard in a Woman's Skin by Lucio Fulci from 1971. For all week, I've been getting the nouns in that title mixed up to the point where I had posted a bunch of stuff on Facebook and I had to go back and delete and retract all of it and rework the artwork because I kept calling it A Woman in a Lizard Skin.
Which, is actually a thing that could happen.
Sure. I don't know that I want to see that, but...
snakeskin jackets? I mean, it's not that far off.
Like a lizard version of Leatherface kind of a thing.
Wow. I hadn't even gone there. It's just fucking regular old, clothes.
So, I wonder if in iguana culture they have like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre with lizard face. Um, anyway, so I was having crazy deja vu about this, and I couldn't recall if maybe the first time I heard about this movie was when we were talking about another Giallo film called The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, because this thing rang so many bells of familiarity regards to that movie that I just figured it had to be some kind of a connection. Do you recall, is that the reason we're talking about this, or was it some other
I think
reason?
we were just entranced by the title. We had rattled off a few of the kind of more influential. This is Lucio Fulci's first real Giallo. He did one on top of the other, which was a couple of years before this, which is also a crime mystery thriller. But this one's kind of like his first real stab at the Giallo, no pun intended. And he, it's also his first pairing with star Florinda Balkan, who he would later work with on Don't Torture a Duckling. The next year.
I can't get over these titles, man.
They're good. They're good. Well, it's funny you said Iguana, because Iguana with the Tongue of Fire also came out the same year.
You're just making that up. You can't.
I'm not.
Oh my God.
I can direct you to a review for it.
Wow. But yeah, so this actually came out the same year as The Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. And I was thinking up until the very end of this movie, I was kind of iffy on, which one do I choose? Do I choose this or do I choose Strange Vice? Because I both enjoy them kind of in their own way, but they feel so similar to me until you get to that last 10 minutes when it all comes together. And we won't spoil what happens there.
Okay.
Unless we dance around it, because I just feel like it's a movie that people should discover, and they keep such a tight lid on the big reveal of who the murderer is. It almost seems unfair. Although I guess watching how Fulci, who also wrote the movie, weaves this kind of plot together, it reminded me of like Basic Instinct about probably 20 years before it came out, to the point where up until like the very last shot of the film, you're like, that's what happened. Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, I was definitely, I have only seen this once before. And I have to say, I didn't remember a darn thing about it, except for one or two scenes that really jumped out at me. And I went, oh, that's right, I have seen that. But in terms of the plot, I couldn't have told you who the murderer was. And I was like, oh wow, this is really, I don't know where this is going to go. So that was kind of fun today, revisiting it.
And it was also interesting because it does remind me of a lot of the other Gialli that we've talked about. I feel like I am one day going to make that Giallo bingo card. You've got the kind of the high society angle to it. You've got the estranged husband who leaves the wife alone a lot to be by herself and possibly stalked by a murderer, and all these other connections. One of the things it also has that I haven't seen before in other Gialli is an extremely low body count. The body count is so low that I think there's 3 deaths in this thing, and the last 2 happen literally within the last 10 minutes.
Yep.
So it almost doesn't count. I've just about given up on this thing because I'm used to the black-clad killer kind of leaping out of the shadows, and a lot more conversation and detective work than say just a regular kind of Italian splatter movie. But this didn't disappoint. Because I did like the headiness, the talkiness, all the psychiatry of what's going on. It was a genuine mystery. And up until that last 10 minutes, which I'm going to stop talking about, I swear, because we might as well just give the thing away, because people are like, what happened to that 10 minutes? I was confused as hell. I'm like, I don't know if this is meant to make sense, because people are talking over each other. They're kind of rewinding the tape of the story, but they're referring back to conversations that happened like an hour and a half ago that I barely remembered. But then they pull that big reveal. It's almost the Psycho ending, where you've got the one guy kind of like laying it all out for the audience, which some might call it pandering, but I appreciate it very much.
No, exactly. Well, and I don't think we could have put it together without our helpful detective. because it actually does lay it out that we think, oh, it's concluded in that X is the killer, even though we wouldn't have guessed that X was going to be the killer. We're like, okay, that's how that is. And then our friendly neighborhood detective goes, actually, X was not the killer. It couldn't have been the killer because Y is the killer, and we know why the killer is. There it is. And I was like, oh, okay, excellent. But I think let's actually go back to the beginning
and tell people what the movie's actually about.
Let's do that, and also because I think the beginning is one of the more. I mean, it does remind me of Strained Vice of Mrs. Ward because it has that hallucinogenic, setting of the scene.
Yeah, definitely. It is, for a film that ends up being as straight-laced as it does, kind of, it starts out on a really trippy note. I had no sense that this was going to be a very adult, and not in that way, but a real think piece.
Also that though.
Right. But I mean, Jesus, this almost had the same problem as I've complained about oddly in some of the other Italian films we've watched, which is just, please put on some clothes. You're all beautiful, but let's move the story along a little bit. Now, actually, let's pause for a second. You watched the 97-minute version, right?
Right.
And I watched the version that was like an hour and 42 minutes or something plus end credits. So I wonder if most of that was either people running through trains in dreams or orgy sex or what? Because
I had that too. So I don't know. I'd be curious to see what the additional 10 minutes are.
Yeah, that's
because I was watching the old Shriek Show DVD, and in looking at Nathaniel Thompson's article on Mondo Digital, which I highly recommend. I think Mondo Digital and Nathaniel Thompson are just outstanding resources in general. But he was detailing some of the different running times and different releases that had come out. And that's when I sent that email to you. I was like, I'm watching the 97-minute version. What's everybody else watching? Because this new Blu-ray, it was Mondo Macabro that put this new Blu-ray out, right?
Right here.
Okay.
There. Yeah, and I see the little logo in the upper corner. I didn't recognize who that company. So
they're terrific. Mondo Macabro puts out some just wonderful primarily foreign horror.
And yeah, it's a nice stacked disc too. I mean, it looks like a no frills kind of Blu-ray, but you flip it over and there's commentaries and documentaries and all sorts of cool things on it. So I'll have to dive into that now that I've actually watched the movie. Folks, I was telling Aaron right before he jumped on, I finished this literally like a minute before I started talking to him, and then we jumped on the air. So it's fresh in my mind.
It's like
yeah, really, very much so. But so let's set this up. There is a woman named Carol Hammond who we see in a dream that she's having where she's running through a packed train and she's very panicked as if someone is chasing her. And then it cuts to shots of her running through the train, it mixed in with her running through an orgy, essentially. I think it was like a white kind of a narrow hallway, and there's all these naked people. I don't think they're actually having sex. They're just kind of crowded around her, and the sex comes later. And she wakes up, and she and her, I'll just say, kind of a very well-to-do family. She's got a dad who's a lawyer who's very high into politics. She's got a husband who's also a lawyer. I think he might work for the old man's firm or something like that. They're very close. They live in a flat that is directly adjacent to a sex club, I think. Is that what I'm to understand?
I just think it's a party girl by the name of, we hear her name so many times.
Julia
Durer. Julia Durer, which for some reason Anita Strindberg, who plays Julia Durer, which is why I couldn't find her name right off the bat, is not listed in the credits.
She's not?
No, at least not in the version that I watched, because if you go into IMDb, she's also listed below as uncredited, which I was like, that seems odd since she's rather key to the plot.
Yeah, maybe that's one of the extra 10 minutes on my Blu-ray where they put her name back in the credits. No, that seems almost criminal because she's got very few lines in the movie, but she's very memorable, not just because she spends the entirety of it either naked or like a like in a sheet,
Right.
or dying. I mean, she is the central victim to this homicide, but she's very alluring. She's very dangerous seeming. And you also get the feeling that there's more to her than what we're being presented, because we're seeing her almost exclusively through this fantasy nightmare dream scenario of Carol, who, from all we know throughout the movie, they've never actually met. She just kind of knows her as this neighbor who has all these wild parties, and you've got the very buttoned up kind of conservative family living next to a, a literal den of sin. It's a really interesting dynamic. I mean, Carol is talking to her therapist, Dr. Carr, about this whole situation, like recording those giant real tapes about someone she's never met, apparently.
Yeah, and that actor George Regard, he shows up in several Italian horror films. I just saw him in Eyeball, Umberto Lenzi's Giallo, not too long ago, and he just showed up in Knife of Ice. Also by Lenzi, and I was like, oh, it's a George Regard double or triple feature now.
I thought it was Michael Gough from the Batman movies at first.
That would be a great thing. But funny story about Michael Gough in a minute. Well, when Carol has that fantasy of going through the train, and then she actually continues that fantasy where she's in bed with Julie.
Yeah.
And then she wakes, and then I think the murder occurs there, or is it later?
I thought it was a little bit later, which is odd because I would assume that Carol would have seen Julia around, but never like interacted with her, because that's kind of important to the story later, is that they didn't know each other.
Well, that's what's said, is that they don't know each other. And I think that's it, that she does know that she's living next door, but she's never like actually spoken to her.
And that's where some of the psychiatry kind of comes into place, of like this doctor saying, well, this mysterious person who has a life that you're kind of wanting to live or experience vicariously, so you're projecting all of this stuff onto her.
Right.
And then you have a murder fantasy, which, that's the gruesome, like multiple stabbing through the chest with what do they call it? A paper knife. It's like a giant letter opener or something like that.
It's a letter opener, right?
Yeah, and she's also in this train pursuit dream. She's wearing a big gray fur coat, which I can't remember. Did that is actually something that Carol owned, but was there talk about what that was supposed to represent in terms of the dream?
I don't think so. I mean, after the murder, because Juliet is murdered, as you said. They find Carol's letter opener, her gray fur coat, and her scarf at the scene of the crime, which makes it seem very clear that she's the one who did the killing. But over the course of the movie, we find that suspicion both falls on Carol and away from Carol. And I think that you're frozen, Ian. So I will just keep talking. After we see that Carol, has left these items there, there's a whole investigation. We learn that her husband, who is played by Jean Sorel, French actor, and the character's name is Frank Hammond. And he is having a little affair on the side. And we find that out because somebody calls her father, Carol's father, and prompts the question as to whether or not Frank is having the affair. Now, because of that, Frank also becomes a suspect, because the question is, hey, look. Oh, what?
Hey,
wait.
AC, you're not going to believe this. I had no way of communicating this to you in real time, but my stream died and then it came back. I saw on my laptop that you were talking still, but then it just magically reconnected, and now we've got Bryan.
Look at that. I was like, I thought you like went out and got Bryan and then brought him back.
No, it went dead some reason right when I was trying to add Bryan in. You jinxed us, man. But no,
Sorry.
It's all good.
And he's eating.
He's eating, and he's got
I'm
a new
on my lunch break.
Oh, okay. And you're also like not clean shaven, but you got a new thing going on.
You got a new style going, don't you?
Yeah.
I guess. I mean, I had a beard, and then I don't.
That's the new style.
No, it's great to have you back. I'm glad you could join us tonight. AC was just talking about, well, when I dropped off like 19 minutes ago or whatever, it seems like it. He was talking about the murder scene in Lizard in a Woman's Skin. So, what what I miss?
So I just brought people up to date saying that not only is Carol a suspect, but Frank is also a suspect because we find out that he's having an affair, and that Carol's father is aware of it. So there's a lot of suspicion. Ooh, look at that!
Sorry, I was getting a little claustrophobic there, which is weird. So there's suspicion, yeah.
There's a lot of suspicion being danced around as to who the various suspects might be, including these two crazy the stoner couple that was at Julie's party when she was murdered.
And they're an odd duo because I swear I spent half the movie wondering if they were actually real. And she sees them in this murder fantasy as almost these Shakespearean wood nymphs or something, just kind of like sitting up on the railing. They're all very pale and kind of, and the first time I think we see them, they've got the white kind of dead zombie eyes, which was a kind of a cool effect. But yeah, I need to watch this movie again because, as I mentioned, before, I finished this just before we jumped on, so I got it. I understand what they did ultimately, but I'm not quite sure how the interior mechanics work. Now with these two hippie kids, I think they're kind of the red herrings, and not to mention the redheaded red herring hippie. I think weren't there two redheaded hippies? One actually was like speaking with an Irish accent, and the other wasn't. Or is that the same guy? I got confused there.
I think that's the same guy.
Yeah,
really, but he's not one of the hippie kids, or is he? Was he the other dude? Because the guy who was being interrogated by the cops earlier, right? I mean, he was full on like Lucky the Leprechaun on acid with his accent, and then the guy at the end, I don't think he had as pronounced an accent, but I might have just been.
You mean the guy the guy they bring in who has the wrong information about how he stabbed her?
Yes.
Okay, so yes, that is a different guy.
Okay, but they look very similar. Yeah, I was totally thrown for a loop.
Confused.
To the point where at the end I was like, wait, didn't that guy have an Irish accent? Is he faking? Is this another twist or something? I don't know. Bryan, what is that? Is that you? It's a weird.
That's I work in this huge warehouse now, and there's machines honking. That's why I didn't want to like jump in here.
Oh, well, but we love you. We want you to participate. So since you're kind of joining us later in the stream, and again, we're happy to have you on. Let's talk about what you think of Lizard in a Woman's Skin. I don't know how long we have you. Okay.
I love it. It's I have to sit down and think about it, but it's definitely up there in terms of my favorite Fulci films. Just because, when you look at some of the stuff, like the eye stuff and things like that, like you see some similar parallels to some of his later stuff. But I just think this one and one on top of the other, which is also called Perversion Story. They're very artful, and it's like when you compare this to the New York Ripper, that's why I'm always like, man, it's such a contrast. It's like the same filmmaker, but he's working on so many different levels, Yeah. So this one really showcases his, I guess, his auteur aesthetic or whatever. So I love it. I love Florinda Balkan in this. To me, she's like the centerpiece of this whole movie. it's based on her lunacy and just her sanity and things like that. So I'm very attached to the imagery in this movie. There's this amazing scene that I don't know if it's like mimicked in other films or whatever, but the scene where the phone rings and everybody just like, and then it's like the close up of the phone and then the person comes over to answer the phone, where it's like, I think it's, I forget what movie it is, but it's an actual like big giant phone.
Oh,
like,
Top Secret.
Like Top Secret.
Yeah. But it's just little touches like that where it's like, oh my God, this is Fulci, and wow.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of phones, there was a wonderful, and I agree, this was a degree of kind of craftsmanship and thinking about story visually that I was not expecting. But there was a scene later in the film where Carol's husband is on the phone, and the camera pans from him being on the phone to what seems like right next to him in the room. It's another person on the phone, almost like they're listening in on the same phone line like they used to do in the old days. But no, it turns out it's a completely separate apartment. It's just Fulci used that swift transition to show that these two people were listening to the same call in completely different locations. I was like, whoa, you might spend, $3,000 or whatever it is on a digital effect to like, do like some kind of a swipe or something nowadays. Now there's like, oh no, these guys are sitting in the room, but completely different sets.
Right.
Yeah.
So in that regard, it's just, and the opening, like, it's like very nightmarish. It's very dream-like, it's just such a, to me, I love this film. I could watch this at any given point.
We are drawing comparisons between this and Strange Vice and Mrs. Ward. Because they both have that opening that's so like crazy and hallucinogenic, and you're like, what's happening? Is this real? Is this fantasy? What is this?
And it's also the woman who's, again, kind of estranged from her husband, who's having dreams about death. And are these, her fantasies? Are they confessions? Are they, predictions? There's chases up like winding staircases. And even just thinking about Blood and Black Lace, which we talked about, I think for our first Accademia Giallo, the opening credit sequence is very kind of colorful and weird. It doesn't have like people involved in it, but I was getting that kind of vibe. Like if you just turn that red tint blue, it would it'd be totally of a piece there. So yeah, talking about the not disparity, but the difference between Fulci in the New York Ripper and this, like that was one of the dirtiest kind of like down and dirty movies I've seen, and this film is very clean. Even the murders are artfully done. They feel like staged, almost like sculptures you'd go to see in some kind of a perversion museum, rather than just stuff that was meant to shock you. It's like something that's meant to be shocking, but also, to something to behold.
But unless we talk about animal cruelty.
Oh my God. I blanked that out. Thank you, Bryan.
Always happy to help.
So at one point, Carol was this the, there was the hospital. Okay. She was like in an institution because she'd gone a little batty.
Yep.
But she gets pursued by this guy, through the institution, and ends up in a room with a bunch of bats. Not bats. Foxes. Dogs. Were they dogs or they had ears. I thought they looked like foxes, but they were squealing like dogs or like kind of whining like hounds. I got confused.
Thought they were dogs.
Okay. It could very well be. I mean, they were strung up in such unnatural positions and strung together with their guts hanging out.
Yep.
What struck me as weird about this, what was the purpose of that room? Because I think this was supposed to be a real life scene and not a fantasy. Is that right?
Yeah, it's really, I mean, that's the vivisection. That's the dog vivisection section of the hospital. I think all hospitals have one.
Of course. I mean, geez.
Pretty sure you have the canine, vivisection section.
You know what? I know nothing about medicine or animals, so I could
clearly.
Yeah. But no, because the thing that struck me as odd is that I think in the next scene, there's like the head of the hospital who says, "Oh, don't worry, the person who left that door open will be reprimanded."
That's right. You shouldn't be able to go into that room. I mean, only authorized personnel.
What's hilarious about that scene is like if you Wikipedia this movie, it actually has a
Who does
section
that?
for the dog scene. Like it actually has, because like some movies have like production and cast or whatever. There's a section devoted just for the dog scene in this
Right, because he got brought up on charges.
Mhm.
Wait,
I thought it was real. They literally thought.
oh, okay, because it was
dog
so
was real.
convincing. Okay,
Yeah.
I
At
thought
the time, you got to think like the early '70s, something like that, like hits you in the face. It's like, whoa, like.
But it's kind of a glimpse into Fulci, his kind of methodology of like, I'm going to shock you and disorient you with this really grotesque image.
Absolutely.
I mean, we would see that obviously, more later on, where he's just looking to shock for shock's sake in order to disorient. But here, because she could have stumbled into any room, but she stumbles into that room. And I really, speaking of animals, I mean, I love that whole sequence. You touched upon it, Ian, that sequence where she's being pursued by one of the guys who might be one of the killers. That whole chase through the church is phenomenal. And leading
Beautiful.
up to, that the scene with the bats, and you got the lock that's being, hammered away at, and you're watching the screws being pounded out of the door, and you're like, and the bats are flying around and like just consistently getting in her hair. I was just like, like you would think bat number one would tell the other guys, there's a chick here. We should probably not fly into her. But he's not a helpful bat, nor is bat number 2 or 3 or 4.
Well, when she first goes into that room, doesn't she see a bat that again looks like it's been vivisected on the floor? What are we to make of that? I don't think anyone went up there and murdered the bat. Did the other bats kill it, or did she hallucinate that? What do you make? What was your interpretation of that?
My interpretation of it was ew, and then and I think that was Lucio. I think that was Lucio's intent, was to give it something for her to scream about, so that he could, so that our killer could come find her.
What's evident with me, like so far with these films and Ian being introduced to these films, and I just like it's clear to me now, right? After the demons episode, it's almost like he's still holding on to that logic. He's still trying to like, this is why this happened, and this is why this, you know what I mean? With these Italian films, Ian, sometimes you just gotta let go, man. You just gotta accept the imagery.
Well, no, but that's the thing is I do understand that. I understand that some filmmakers do operate on that level, and we've seen that in some of these films. But I also understand that sometimes they are operating on a deeper level,
right?
And especially because, like, I literally just finished watching this, and sorry to say, I had to watch this in chunks throughout the day because I'm like doing family stuff and all that. Mm-hmm. I was just thinking, did I miss something? Is there, when I go back and watch this again, will I pick up on a theme or a plot point that I missed where they were doing something up there with the bats, or maybe this is just Fulci messing around? And I accept either one. I just like coming up with theories because they're fun, and maybe there's something to them or not.
It's fun for us too.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it.
But actually, as far as that bat, I don't know if you guys have any insight into the making of the film. I could probably find out on the commentary or the extras on the Blu-ray, but was she being attacked by bats, or was that just like, because I know it was a lot of close-up shots, so I imagine there could have been people with, like fishing poles kind of like battering her head with bats and like, oh no.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, I thought that was one of the more convincing bat attacks I've seen. I mean, yes, we do realize that they are fake, but I mean, if you look at things like any of the Hammer films where, the rubber bats are flying in and they're just patently, fake, this was actually pretty good, pretty convincing. And if you weren't holding on her, having to pull them out of her hair, I think it would have been even more so.
Speaking of hair,
I love how well orchestrated that scene is. Like, it is the repeated shots into the lock on the door. I think it's one of his finest moments.
Absolutely. Speaking of hair, AC, I love yours this evening.
Well, thank you. See, my cries for help are being answered finally.
Okay, we got to go back and talk about this church because I was thoroughly confused by what I was looking at. Because it looked to me like a cross. It looked almost like someone was trying to build a church out of a warehouse. It doesn't look traditional. I mean, the first part of the chase takes place where she's sort of outside underneath these like arcs, these kind of stone arcs, almost like a outdoor basement kind of a thing. And then she runs up into this warehouse portion of the church. But then you see there's a huge organ and this kind of like a stained glass circle kind of a thing, and then she leads up into the, I guess, the bell tower where the bats are. But it wasn't immediately what I thought. In fact, I thought that they were referring to something else, like, oh, she's going to go to the church after she goes to this place. But yeah, what do you guys thoughts on this production design? Maybe it's a found location. I don't know if they dressed it up or not.
Obviously, you've never visited an Italian church in the early 70s.
They all look like that.
Yeah.
I didn't visit anywhere in the early 70s.
My guess would be like they just found the space and dressed it up to make it look like that with the organ and everything. That's my educated guess.
Well, and I would also say it's probably an amalgam of locations, you know, strung together through the magic of cinema.
Right.
But I mean, that's kind of the that's a choice, right? Yeah. Because they could have found a church, or if they had to dress up a location, they could have shot it in such a way that it looks like a traditional church. I mean, this looked like
a deadline. We gotta go. We gotta go.
Again, this is not a criticism. It's just something I'm watching. I'm like, I never would have conceived of this idea, but now I kind of want every warehouse to look like a church and every church to look like a warehouse.
Like I will say, like when I delved into filmmaking myself and we made Gelato Giallo, we literally used one room. You know what I mean? Our location kind of fell through, so we were forced to use one room to make it look like it's an entire apartment and whatnot. You know, so it's like we moved stuff around, we did this and that. So like, just with that mentality, I would imagine somebody like a Fulci is like, oh, well, we shoot it like this, and we put this here, and then this serves what it needs to serve, and then we move on to the dog scene or whatever.
Yeah, and I love that spirit, and that's what I don't know. It feels like is missing from a lot of movies nowadays is the idea that they're actually
green screen and
but the idea that they're actually, I don't know quite how to articulate it, but the fact that they're making something, they're creating something, and then moving on to the next thing. Everything nowadays seems so like fabricated, and it's just like shotless. This feels very much kind of impromptu. Like they may have done some location scouting, but they found this place and like, oh, we can work with it. It's going to be great.
Right.
It's a church, sure. But
Ian, have you seen Florinda Balkan in anything else? This is the first time you've seen her?
I think so. I mean, that's the other problem with doing this series of Giallo films is I keep seeing people who I think I might have seen in other movies, but I can't be sure because they all kind of have the same aura about them.
Well, we've seen the psychiatrist, right?
Right. I talked about, we've seen him pop up a couple times. And I was saying, I've actually seen him a couple times recently. He was in Knife of Ice, and he was in he was in Eyeball, both Lenzi films.
Well,
have we seen Anita Strindberg in something else?
I was just pulling up her
like in any one of these films that we've seen.
I don't know that we've watched. I mean, Case of the Scorpion's Tail and Who Saw Her Die in Your Vice Locked Room, and Only I Have the Key. A lot of movies that I know, but I don't think that we've seen together. She's also in The Antichrist, which is a great, crazy movie.
Wait, the Antichrist or Antichrist by Lars von Trier?
Not that Antichrist.
Okay.
The Antichrist, which is an Italian film, and it's Exorcist ripoff kind of, and it's just wonderfully and truly bonkers.
Mm-hmm.
Dig it. One thing, talking about interchangeability, aside from Carol and some of the characters that we come to know, I guess, over the course of the film, I had a hard time with the character dynamics with the women in this film.
Hmm.
Because there's like they're all sitting around the family kind of breakfast table after this nightmare sequence that opens the movie. That's when they talk about, oh, there's this Julia lady living next door, and there's all sorts of crazy sex parties. Joan, who I guess is Carol's daughter, but not Frank's daughter. Is that right? Is it a second marriage situation or what?
No, she's his daughter.
Okay.
Because she's like, that's why she's so invested in clearing his name.
Okay. Well, because there's also the redhead lady who shows up, who Frank is sleeping with,
Right.
and she is in some of these scenes with Carol and Joan. So I didn't. Maybe it's because Joan looked much older to me, and Carol looked much younger than I think she was supposed to be. I thought they were friends. I did not get, or sisters. I didn't get the idea that this is like a mother-daughter thing until much later in the movie. And I also wondered if the redhead was related in some way, but turns out she's just, sleeping with the husband.
Right.
Yeah. Whoa, wow.
Intimate relations.
Yes. And also the husband, Frank, looked a lot like a cross between Sam Neill and Sebastian Stan, who plays the Winter Soldier in the Marvel movies. So that was distracting. Has he been in other things that I can look out for?
Yeah.
I believe is he in Perversion Story?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, I thought so.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like he would star in a movie with that title. Yeah.
He's also in Day of the Jackal, Belle de Jour. There's some of his bigger titles. What was I just going to say? Anyway, carry on.
I'll let Bryan carry on.
He's also.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. So our inspector Corvin, that guy totally looks like John Cleese half of the movie.
Yes.
Like every so often, there's the camera angle, and I'm like, that's John Cleese. I'm just expecting to hear Basil Fawlty's voice coming out of him because they are in London,
Yeah. That's what this movie needs. Actually, I was thinking when I thought the detective was going to be a much bigger part of the movie than it ended up being, because he's important in the first part, kind of towards the end, but he sort of drops out of the middle. I was thinking we need a series called just Giallo Cops, because they all have a type. They could go on our Giallo bingo card, but they're always very entertaining and eccentric in their own ways. I think if someone were to come up with like a weekly series where they just go around solving murders in their own very Giallo cop way, I would totally tune in for that.
Well, and actually you bring up a good point, because there's a lot of ways in which this Giallo is different from others. We do not have a black gloved killer. There's as you said, there's a very low body count. I don't even think we see a bottle of J&B. I mean, it's very kind of like it's a different kind of Giallo.
Now, in the same way that we talked about Fulci trying to put a definite stamp on, kind of like that with the New York Ripper, do you think he was trying to do something different and like put a voice to his version of Giallo with this movie?
Well, this was 1971, so I mean, like Bird with the Crystal Plumage had just been a big hit the year before. So 1971 is really 71, 72 are when we see a lot of Gialli coming out. So I think that he was certainly trying to get in the race, and I don't know. I mean, Bryan, you could probably speak to this more than I, but like, had a lot of those conventions already been established? Do you think he was bucking convention?
Well, I mean, his first entry was Perversion Story,
right,
into the Giallo. I think, like, and this is just me being, a fan of Fulci. I think he's always just been unconventional. You know what I mean? So if he sees this is what the normal is for this genre, he's going to do his own thing anyway. Like when you look at I believe it's his next film, Don't Torture a Duckling. Like he just goes into, religion stuff and, total, like when you consider what a Giallo is, the framework of a Giallo, with the black glove killer, with, the score, with the colors and all that stuff. Don't Torture a Duckling is so far removed from all that, but I still consider it a giallo because of the body count, because of the mystery that's involved, because of the red herrings, things of that nature, you know. So he's even like in New York Ripper, he's playing with slasher elements, but it's also a giallo, you know. So I think he's always been someone that just thinks outside of the box, and whatever box he's thinking of in the beginning is just a totally different box from anybody else's. So, you know, for him to, I think really in this time frame, he was just more and I don't even think he's the one that named the film, but the way that the film has an animal in the title, because all these films were coming out, the Scorpion's Tail, and
Iguana with the Tongue of Fire, and
things like that. It was like he's playing with those same things but using different tools. So I don't necessarily think that his intention was to make a cookie cutter giallo. He just wanted to like dip his toe in that genre and do his own thing, really. You know?
I did like how they dropped the title into the dialogue. I was like, she's like a lizard in a woman's skin. I was like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking the whole time. You just really nailed it for me.
Personally, I think that's like a play on when Argento did Bird with the Crystal Plumage, and how they tie that title into the film or whatever. I think that's his way of doing that, maybe.
Well, I actually like the notion of, what it is that it is a lizard that is blending in to its environment. And that was something I think when I just read the title on its own, I don't get that. And then I'm like, oh, that's what this is. That's this lizard that's able to transform and become something else depending on the environment that it's in.
And it's also this sort of the cold-blooded nature of the creature, because there's this complete detachment. And again, Brian, we're trying to dance around spoilers here, especially because they're in the last like 10 minutes of the movie when the big reveal happens, and up till that point, you think you know what's going on, but it turns out you really don't. But I think it's kind of perfect down to the closing shot of the film, which is involves the killer, the killer's comeuppance, and it's not dramatic. It's very quiet, and I'm trying to think of another film in which I've seen that kind of a takedown. If you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
I
love how kind of, and I really do enjoy that detective character in this. I like his little whistling theme that gets threaded through all the way through. I love Ennio Morricone's score. And I love how like we never quite is he whistling now, or is that just part of the score? It's really kind of fun how he threads that through.
And was this some kind of did Tarantino draw on this particular thing as an influence for when he was doing Kill Bill? I feel like I had read that he had drawn inspiration for some Italian film. I don't know if it was this one or if a lot of people just whistle during in Gialli.
Strange Vice.
That's from a different.
Was that from Strange Vice? Okay. Now I'm glad that Carol in a later scene when she's sitting in the room with the detective and they're kind of talking, he starts whistling. She actually looks at him sideways, because throughout the rest of the film, everyone's just like, "Oh, that's just Dave. It's what he does," And even that in of itself is a red herring, because I'm waiting for the scene where like the murder happens and there's someone whistling in the background or whatever. But I also like that the detective that you think you're going to follow throughout the movie, the younger guy, and you think the senior inspector is going to be like the hard ass who just kind of shows up to bark things and leaves. The roles completely switch, and the chief inspector becomes the sort of the main key to all of this, and the character you really kind of care about in the end.
And you see, like, again, it's Fulci playing with the elements that, the themes that are presented in front of him during the time when these films are coming out. Like, I want to work with an Ennio Morricone. I want to use some of these same actors. I want to use some of these same themes. But at the same time, it's like you could just tell. Like, I love all the films that came out from this period, but a lot of them are lumped together simply because they're so similar to each other. The thing that makes Fulci stand apart from them is just his own way of conceiving a giallo, his own way of conceiving a zombie movie, for Christ's sakes. You know what I mean? He just, it blows up into this thing that's all of its own, you know? So that's why I've always, since the inception of this Scuola de Giallo.
This is Giallo Accademia.
Accademia Giallo.
I'm sorry, I flunked with the title, but with this project, like I've always been like, that's why I had to get on the show. Like, even though I'm at work, like it's like I had to, because this film is important to me, because it's such a departure from what we conceive as a giallo with all these elements in it, you know.
So here's actually, I'm glad you brought that up, Bryan, because I'm actually noticing as we continue to watch, you know, more and more of these gialli, they aren't really all the same. You know, I think that's the sweeping generalization, is that they all have X, Y, and Z. But I feel like so many of them are, that they're certainly more individualistic than, say, like your slasher movies.
Right.
Really do follow kind of a template. You know, you're getting a group of people together. There's usually some, you know, some backstory as to why the killer is doing all this. But I don't feel like that's been the case for at least not the ones that we've looked at the show, on this show. Like, they come from all different ways. The motives are all very different. And the methods are different. The heroines are different. I mean, it's kind of like, I mean, you were saying that you got a Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward feel on this, but if you put those two trains together, they don't run along the same tracks. They take very divergent turns.
And I think that's why, and Bryan, we were kind of talking about this before you jumped on. I was a little concerned because up to a certain point watching the movie, I thought they are their different, you know, kind of films, but they were similar in a lot of different ways. I was like, do I have to choose now, like, which one I like more? But I don't, because they wind up taking such divergent paths that it would make a great double feature. It's almost like a choose your own adventure, where you're going on a straight path, and then at some certain point, like, oh, I'm going to go this way, and, you know, things are vastly different than I expected.
Well, there are the films that have the Black Glove Killer. Like, there, you know, I felt like this is a good direction to sort of navigate to, because it's showing you the different types of, you know, because like once we start getting into like what's that one called, the so sweet, so dead,
So sweet, so diverse.
What's that?
No, that's so, yeah, sorry.
The one with the killer on the beach, like that's the template right there. That's the one that, you know, like that, you know, even like Black Belly of the Tarantula, things like that. Like they do play with gloves. They do have like specific weapons that they use. It's very, you know, they play with a lot of red herring type stuff. It's a cop that's searching these out, or an amateur detective or whatever. The one, I can't think of the title, but it's Death in High Heels.
I don't know where you're going with this, so I can't help you.
And there's no animal in the title, so it doesn't count.
Walks in High Heels, like just things like that. They're very, they're much more like, oh, that's a giallo. They're following the template, and they're not really going. They're not straying. They're great films. They're amazing, entertaining films, but they're not necessarily going out of bounds of like the usual elements of what the genre is known for, you know.
So it could be, to AC's point, that the films that we've been choosing for Accademia Giallo happen to be the ones that are more outside the box, or playing with those conventions, and there are a slew of other movies that are just kind of
absolutely
vanilla giallo.
But that's the thing, like with this genre, they're anything but
vanilla gelato.
Yeah.
Ooh. There's actually this new place that I work at. There's a gelato place like real close by. So
nice. All right. Well, we're kind of getting to the end of our time here, winding things down. Wow. So, do you have any final thoughts on Lizard in a Woman's Skin? I think it was a fantastic movie. I did appreciate that there is a lot of great detective stuff and psychology in here. One thing I didn't mention was there's the kind of the nerdy lab coat guy who's analyzing the blown up pictures of the crime scene and talking about like analyzing the footprints and all this other stuff. I'm like, I don't know why this is in this movie, but I'm so glad this is in this movie. It's like CSI 1971 with, boobs and gore, selectively placed gore.
I love it. I think anybody out there that hasn't seen this and they're a Fulci regular and they think they've seen every Fulci, this is a pleasant surprise. This is a filmmaker working on another level than what you're accustomed to him working, and this is like a good segue into films like Don't Torture a Duckling, and then even prior, one on top of the other, which is also known as Perversion Story. So I think, and Ian, you did it right. Like the Mondo Macabro Blu-ray is the one to get if it's still available out there.
Well, it is, and that's something that you're saying people should watch this. I agree. However, I don't know how they watch it because I looked for this. It's not on any streaming platform. I couldn't check it out from my library. I had to go to Amazon and buy an $18 Blu-ray, and I'm glad I did. Don't get me wrong, but it just feels like all of these things should be easily available.
Support physical media.
Definitely. But no, so AC, what are your final thoughts on the lizard in a woman's skin? See, I got it right this time.
Well done. I honestly, I just kind of follow what Bryan was saying. I mean, like, this is a great introduction. If you think you know Lucio Fulci from Zombie and from House by the Cemetery, that this is a different side of him, and I think it gives more of an appreciation for him as a director, as a creator. He isn't just somebody who's throwing nightmare logic and gore at the screen. He's able to really craft something. If you watch this and Don't Torture a Duckling together, you can't help but have a fuller appreciation for him.
Absolutely.
Nice. All right, cool. Well, before we let each other go, let's catch up on what horror movies we've watched this week as part of our individual Scare-a-Thons. Because we're down to a few minutes, we'll just name like the top 2 movies we've watched this week, the ones that you'd recommend. AC, since this is your baby, why don't you go?
Well, I was going to break the rules and go through my alphabet because I saw The Mangler, I saw Nightwish, I saw The Old Ways, the one that Kitley mentioned last week. Then on P was Point of Terror, which is insane. I highly recommend it. It's in kind of Turkey land. It's a great kind of it's a double feature with Blood Mania from Vinegar Syndrome. I highly recommend it. And then Q was Queen of Blood. R was The Redeemer, aka Class Reunion Massacre. And then today was The Shadow of the Cat, which is kind of a Hammer film, but not quite.
Wait, what was that Redeemer title?
The Redeemer, Son of Satan, aka Class Reunion Massacre. And if you haven't seen it, you should, because it's 1978, so it predates a lot of the slashers, kind of what we were talking about. It has all of these slasher conventions in it, and yet it came out before the slasher subgenre blew up. So nice. It's pretty, and it has the most insane wraparound bookend you could ask for. I'm just going to say 2 thumbs on one hand.
Okay. I got to check that out. All right, Bryan, how about you?
I'll mention just 2. And these are 2 that I haven't seen before. And one was like, man, I haven't seen this one. Crystal Eyes from 2017, I want to say. It's Neo Giallo. It came out from Argentina. And it's good. It's if you're into like 80s style Jolly, and you have that Giallo filter already in you, like it's a pretty entertaining film, and it takes some interesting twists and whatnot. And then since like I listened to your episode, Ian, on Fright Night,
Oh, cool.
I totally recommend this one because I know you're a big fan of Fright Night. The Wretched from 2019. I think it came out last year, but they released it this year or something. But it's a witch story that follows some of the same storytelling as something like Fright Night. So that one was a good surprise. The only thing that rubbed me the wrong way, and I won't reveal anything, but there's a stinger in there that I was like, it's not, it's like one of those like unearned things that you see. So, but if you're able to put that aside, it's a refreshing sort of retelling of the structure of Fright Night, but except done with witches. And I only did that because I've never seen the film Hocus Pocus. And I wanted to rectify that the other day, and I watched it and I realized, oh my God, like I didn't grow up with this film. You know, there's a lot of nostalgia attached to this film, and I hated the goddamn movie.
I've never seen it. I still have not seen it.
Totally don't recommend the film. So I needed something to cleanse the witch palette in me, and I found The Wretched, and that did just that. So
Hocus Pocus was just about my generation. And I'd kind of seen it like in bits and pieces, but I watched it in full a few years ago because my wife loves it, and a lot of people I know love it. I could barely get through it. I don't know. It just was so not on my wavelength, and I was like, it felt like it was 17 hours long. But you know, it's chacun a son goût, as they say in French. So the two movies I'll talk about: Fright Night, which Bryan kind of gave me as a gimme, and Saw 3. I also watched Saw 2, but I watched Saw 3. I'll give that as my recommendation of the two that I watched in preparation for next week's scary season finale of Scare-a-Thon 2020. We're going to be doing a Saw-a-thon, a Saw franchise retrospective. So I have 5 more of these damn movies to watch.
Good luck with that.
So yeah, it'll be fun. I'm just about rounding the corner. I didn't see Jigsaw, the last one, but I did see part. I've got it. I own it now. I'm a quote unquote proud owner of Jigsaw, but I'm getting to the point where I fell out of love with the series. Like after Saw 4, like 5, 6, and the final chapter I found really hard to get through. So I'm going to see if 10 years on I feel differently about these, but it'll be a really good discussion I think next week.
Yeah, I'm glad you recommended Saw 3 because that's probably one of my favorites. I'd say 2 and 3 are the first 3 I like. The first one we'll talk more next week, but the first one, Carrie Elwes kind of sinks it for me.
Yeah.
But then I think the next 2 are really solid. And then, like you say, the 4, 5, 6, 7, it's like, oh man, there's like a movie and a half worth of story here over 4 movies. So
yeah. All right. Well, we will be back talking about the Saw franchise next Friday, 7:15 p.m. Central, or this Friday, whenever you're watching this recording. This will be up on the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. By the way, please support Boxville by going to boxville.org/donate if you're able to give. Also, feel free to subscribe to this channel and also follow AC and Bryan. Bryan, I want to solve this mystery before we go. It's not your birthday today, is it? Okay, because I got in March. Okay, because I got a Baron Martino notification on Facebook that it was his birthday today.
Oh, so you're friends with Baron Martino?
Yes, and I'm very confused.
First of all, I apologize for that. I don't know why you ever reached out to that guy. Second of all, he's the host of the Giallo Room. So.
Yes, I understand that, and I'm struggling because I've never actually interacted, like had a face-to-face conversation with the Baron. So I'm half convinced that it's actually you, and you're pulling like a weird I'm producing the show and he's the host, but it's all kind of the same guy. Tell me it's a different dude.
I mean, he's not me. Clearly, I can never be as cool as that guy.
Yeah. It's Baron Martino. The only thing that's the same is that they have the same initials.
Yeah.
I never thought of that.
Bryan Martinez sounds nothing like Baron Martino. So no. Anyway, well, happy birthday to whoever is out there with that name. Maybe there's 1,000. Oh, that'd be weird. But yeah, thanks, gang. Have a great night, and we'll see you back next week for
Catch
more
you later.
Scare-a-Thon. Yes. Bye. Ending.